All right, so who here hasn't uttered the phrase, "I work better under pressure"? Yeah, thought so. We've all been there. But today's deep dive might just change how you view those procrastination tendencies. We're tackling the big why behind procrastination and, more importantly, how to break free from its grasp. And don't worry, we've got your articles on procrastination and motivation right here, ready to unearth some seriously useful insights.
It's funny how many people brush off procrastination as simple laziness. What's really interesting is that it often stems from much deeper psychological mechanisms, especially in high-pressure settings.
You mean like those looming college deadlines or that big presentation at work?
Exactly, those moments where the stakes feel high.
Yeah.
And both of these sources actually highlight how that "I work better under pressure" mantra can easily become a vicious cycle.
Right, because the more we put things off.
The more stressed and overwhelmed we feel, which ironically makes us want to procrastinate even more.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It really is. And that's where the information sheet brings up a crucial point. Procrastination often feeds on itself, creating this loop of stress and avoidance.
So we're not actually more productive under pressure. We just tell ourselves that to kind of, I don't know, justify the procrastination.
It's a classic defense mechanism. And the excerpt from Classroom Resources dives even deeper into that why. Procrastination, they suggest, often masks a deeper fear of failure or even a fear of success.
Whoa, okay, fear of success. That's a new one.
It's wild, right? It's almost like we subconsciously avoid giving our full effort to protect our ego. If we don't try our hardest and we fail, well, we can always blame it on the lack of effort, not our abilities.
That makes sense, actually. So it's less about being lazy and more about self-preservation in a way.
You got it. Protecting that sense of self-worth, especially in environments with such intense performance pressure. And the information sheet actually digs into how this avoidance plays out in our brains. It's all about discomfort and fear. Our brains are hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, right?
Makes sense, so.
So naturally, we're drawn to those instantly gratifying activities, scrolling through social media, watching that next episode, because they offer immediate comfort.
Whereas tackling that daunting task,
Triggers all sorts of uncomfortable emotions.
like that fear of failure we were just talking about, or the pressure to succeed, no wonder we avoid it.
Exactly. We're wired to choose the path of least resistance, even if it ultimately leads to more stress and anxiety down the road.
And the Classroom Resources excerpt takes this even further, suggesting that this whole avoidance thing is amplified in those high-pressure academic settings.
Oh, absolutely. Think back to your college days. The weight of expectations, the constant comparisons, it's basically a breeding ground for procrastination. You're preaching to the choir here. It's in those moments when the pressure's on that procrastination becomes a way to safeguard our self-image. We create a built-in excuse for potential failure. Well, if I'd had more time. Sound familiar?
More like a constant inner monologue?
It's fascinating, though, isn't it? We procrastinate to avoid negative feelings, but it often leads to even more stress and self-criticism in the long run.
It's like we're sabotaging ourselves.
In a way, yeah. Which is why understanding our motivations is so crucial for breaking free from this cycle. And both sources seem to agree on that.
Okay, so how do we untangle those motivations?
Well, the information sheet breaks it down into two main types: intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is all about finding joy in the process itself, doing something because it genuinely interests you. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is driven by external rewards or pressures.
So intrinsic motivation is like, I'm writing this novel because I love storytelling. Extrinsic is, I'm finishing this report because my boss expects it by Friday.
Exactly. And understanding which type fuels us is key for tackling procrastination. They even suggest brainstorming a list of motivators for each of your goals. What are the intrinsic and extrinsic factors driving you towards it?
That's a great strategy, almost like creating a cheat sheet for your own motivation.
It's about knowing yourself. What drives you? What inspires you? What makes you tick? And that's where the Classroom Resources excerpts brings in a really interesting perspective.
I'm all ears.
They emphasize finding productive reasons to engage with tasks. It's not just about identifying your motivation, but also reframing your mindset around the task itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do they mean by productive reasons? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're dreading studying for that upcoming history exam. Instead of focusing on the dreaded task itself, you could reframe it as an opportunity to delve deeper into a period you find fascinating.
So it's about finding the personal meaning and enjoyment, even in those tasks that initially feel like a chore.
Precisely. And both sources actually offer some incredibly practical strategies for putting this newfound understanding of motivation into action and overcoming procrastination. But I think we should save those for part 2.
All right, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. We'll dive into those actionable strategies right after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. All right, so we've uncovered the why behind procrastination, but now for the million-dollar question, how do we actually overcome it?
Well, the good news is both of these sources offer some really practical advice. The information sheet jumps right into the nitty-gritty. They're all about breaking down those monstrous tasks.
Makes sense. Those huge to-dos can be paralyzing.
Exactly. And they're big on setting realistic goals.
So instead of write a novel, it's write 500 words today.
You got it. And they're big on rewards. Too little incentives to keep you going.
Rewards are always a good motivator.
Right. But sometimes, even knowing all the tricks, it's that initial hurdle of getting started that trips us up.
Oh, tell me about it. Starting is the hardest part.
Well, the Classroom Resources excerpt actually dives into a technique for that, the Swiss cheese method. Have you heard of it?
Swiss cheese method for procrastination. Now you've got my attention.
Okay, so picture this. You've got a massive research paper staring you down.
Oh, I know the feeling.
Instead of just staring back at that blank page for hours on end, you set a timer for, say, 15 minutes and just brainstorm.
Just get some initial ideas down.
Exactly. Or let's say you have to read a whole chapter of a textbook. You use the Swiss cheese method to quickly skim it first, highlighting the main points, kind of creating a roadmap. It's about making those small, manageable dents without getting overwhelmed.
I like that. Tricking your brain into thinking, hey, this isn't so bad. I can handle 15 minutes. And before you know it,
You've got some momentum going.
momentum is key for sure.
And the Swiss cheese method, it's especially helpful for people who get overwhelmed by those massive, complex tasks. It's like breaking those tasks into bite-sized pieces.
Bite-sized pieces, much less intimidating.
Exactly. And those little victories can really add up.
Speaking of victories, the information sheet
Mhm.
brought up self-care as a strategy,
Oh, yeah, they're big on that.
which seems kind of out of left field, right? Self-care and procrastination.
It seems counterintuitive, but our physical and mental states, they're more connected than we realize. When we're sleep-deprived, stressed out, not eating right.
Our brains aren't exactly firing on all cylinders.
Exactly. We're more likely to feel overwhelmed, anxious, and boom, procrastination sets in.
So if I'm up late, mainlining coffee, no wonder I'd rather binge watch something than tackle that project.
Right. You're running on fumes at that point. It's like expecting a car to run on an empty tank.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about managing time and tasks, but managing our well-being too.
Exactly. That's where all those strategies come in, breaking things down, setting realistic goals, rewarding yourself. It's about preventing that overwhelmed feeling that often leads to procrastination.
Like creating a positive cycle, taking care of ourselves, gives us the energy to tackle those tasks.
Which in turn motivates us to keep up those good habits. And what I appreciate about both of these sources is they acknowledge that there's no magic bullet.
Yeah, what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you, experimenting with different strategies, figuring out what keeps you motivated. And, being kind to yourself throughout the process. Procrastination is a tough habit to break. It takes time and effort.
And sometimes a little extra support can be helpful, right?
Absolutely. And that's actually something the information sheet touches on. They actually provide some fantastic resources, especially for students. They mention JCU, student equity and well-being.
Okay, so what is that exactly?
It's a great place to find personalized support, whether you need help academically or just someone to talk to about the pressures of being a student. It's easy to feel alone in those struggles, but having those support systems can make all the difference. And it's not just for students. The information sheet also mentions Lifeline.
Lifeline, that rings a bell.
It's a crisis support line. They're available 24/7, totally confidential.
Yeah.
They're there for anyone who's feeling overwhelmed or just needs someone to talk to. Because sometimes procrastination can feel all-consuming. But it's important to remember there are always people ready to listen.
Having that support can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive today, I think the biggest takeaway is that procrastination, it's not some personal failing.
It's not a sign that we're lazy or incapable.
Exactly. It's a human experience. It's often rooted in these deeper psychological mechanisms like we were talking about. It's our brain's way of trying to protect us. even if it doesn't always feel that way.
Sometimes it feels like it's working against us.
Right. So be kind to yourself, celebrate those small victories. Remember, progress isn't always linear. There will be days when procrastination wins, and that's okay.
What matters is that we keep learning, keep trying those strategies, keep figuring out what works best for us, one step at a time.
Exactly. You got this.
So it's really about recognizing those moments and being proactive about seeking support when we need it.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a full-blown crisis either. Sometimes it's just about having someone to talk to, someone who gets those unique pressures we face. And that's what's so great about the resources mentioned in the information sheet, like that JCU Student Equity and Well-Being. They're there to provide that personalized support, whether it's academic coaching or just a listening ear.
Because it's easy to feel like you're the only one struggling, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're in the thick of it. But having those support systems can make such a difference.
100%. And remember, reaching out is not a sign of weakness. It takes strength to acknowledge when you need a little help.
It's a reminder that we're not in this alone. We all face challenges. We all stumble from time to time.
Exactly. And sometimes just knowing that there are people out there who understand and are there to help can be incredibly empowering.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I think the biggest takeaway is that procrastination, it's not a character flaw. It's not this insurmountable obstacle.
It's a human experience.
And often one that's rooted in these deeper psychological mechanisms that we've been unpacking.
Like our brains trying to protect us, even if it doesn't always feel that way in the moment. So be kind to yourself, celebrate those small victories, and remember, progress isn't always linear. There will be days when procrastination wins, and that's okay. It's part of the process.
Exactly. What matters is that we keep learning, we keep experimenting with those strategies we discussed, and we keep figuring out what works best for us as individuals.
One step at a time.
You got this, everyone. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time.
See you next time.